Good morning, everybody.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning. First of all, I want to thank all of you for joining this class. I want to thank also all of you for flexing on the time. At long last, hopefully on Thursday, Shira and I are going to be able to go to Israel to visit our father in Jerusalem. That trip got aborted in November because of COVID changes and got scheduled and aborted in December because of COVID changes. And now we're finally going to be able to go, but we needed a PCR test, which is hard to schedule nowadays. And the slot required this postponement by half an hour. So thank you for flexing. Also want to thank Samantha Price, who is our colleague who is hosting. So thank you, Sam. So let's first thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Then we have so very much to talk about. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So since the time that we met last week, of course, all of us heard about a place that we had never heard of before, Colleyville, Texas. And before I get into the material, the content that I had sent you, I wanted to just invite a space to think about Colleyville, Texas, to think about Rabbi Charlie, to think about hostage taking, to ask you how that terrible story made you feel, and what thoughts and what feelings that story triggered, caused you to have. And then after we talk about that, and it's actually, sadly, a perfect lead-in to the content that I was going to share with you today anyway. But first, any reactions to Texas? And feel free also to put your name in the chat if you'd like to speak. And Samantha can let me know that you are wanting to speak, or I'll see it myself. So anyone want to just share a word about Texas? Linda Leffert. And Linda, if you could unmute, please.
Yeah. I think I am.
Yeah.
No, it didn't strike me originally as something anti-Semitic. I mean, I had a little trouble with the connection. The person he wanted removed, he wanted someone who was a terrorist released. It wasn't clear to me why he even thought those people had any ability to do that, unless I missed the whole point.
Well, the whole point was he went to a shul and he held Jews under the threat of an armed gun on Shabbat morning. I think that was the anti-Semitism part.
Right.
He didn't go to a Starbucks. He didn't go to a church. He didn't go to a mosque. He went to a synagogue. I myself was beyond nonplussed by the FBI comment. I honestly thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard.
Yeah, well,
It wasn't anti-Semitism. Clearly, it was anti-Semitism. He went to a synagogue during Shabbos morning services and held daveners, worshipers under threat of gun. And then he wanted to talk to, there's also the craziest thing, he wanted to talk to the chief rabbi of America, Angela Buchdahl, who's the rabbi at Central Synagogue. Yeah. So it was clear, and then he had a lot of rantings about how Jews control things.
Yeah.
So that's where the anti-Semitism part, I think, came from. Other comments about this event, and then happy to pivot to our material, but I did want to offer an opportunity to reflect on it. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Please.
Alice. The rabbi at the synagogue, and perhaps you said this already and I apologize, mentioned that their training was very useful. And in the past, the ADL has provided trainings to Jewish leadership.
Right.
And I was wondering if our synagogue, perhaps in conjunction with some other synagogues, would consider doing a training. Because I attended those ADL trainings and they were excellent.
Thank you. I thought the same thing when I read the article. I know that our security plan is carefully vetted by Newton Police Department and by CJP's security program. But I myself have not been trained What do you do if someone comes in to your, and the whole story is just so sad and so 2022 and so pandemic. There's 3 people in shul and the rabbi, 3 people and the rabbi. That's just so pandemic. That's just so real. And then also, you know, rabbis, synagogues, congregants are all trained to be warm and welcoming. So it's a cold day out. So of course, welcome. And then the guy that you welcome pulls a gun on you and terrifies you and terrorizes you for 11 hours. So I would love, so the short answer to your question, Alice, is we have not yet been trained, but I know that our people are meeting with CJP and other law enforcement today. There's a big Zoom call, and I'm sure that that will happen. We will want to be trained on how to handle this kind of situation.
I'm talking about even the whole congregation having a training.
We'll ask whatever the, you know, I'm just a rabbi. I just talk about the Torah portion. You know, this whole idea of being prepared for this kind of thing is above my pay grade. Whatever the experts advise, will do to be safe. Any other thoughts about Texas before we get into the content? Marilyn Kalis. You're on mute, guys.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're perfect.
It was extremely upsetting. And I have to just say that the rabbi, as a spokesman for Judaism, was so good. I mean, his words were really comforting and intelligent. And the focus that the news has on this, I hope, will bring some more resolutions, some more answers to why and how we can deal with this, because it's just extremely frightening to adults, and I can't imagine children how they feel.
Yeah, you know, Marilyn, you talk about the press coverage. I want to just shift the focus for a quick second. What did you think of the press coverage of the hostage incident, and how did that make you feel? And I'm trying to channel, you know, my inner Dara Horn, people love dead Jews. You remember that when she talks about particularly the attacks in Muncie and the tri-state area on Orthodox and Hasidic Jews, she spends a lot of time talking about how the press covered it, namely, kind of, as she puts it, giving context, which would excuse the attacks on Jews. And I'm wondering what you thought about the press coverage of Texas. Judy Swartz, and then Judy Zafran.
Okay, so I was going to say to you, Rabbi, did you see Barry Weiss, who wrote just to that point, and said she feels Jews should be terrified by what happened, and particularly by what the press didn't say, and how the AP kind of almost whitewashed it being a Jewish thing. And it was a whole deal. We need to protect the person who did it. And it was ambivalent. So I was very alarmed. And when you read Barry Weiss, you get 3 times as alarmed. She really says you got to pay attention to exactly what happened. And honestly, I didn't think the president said enough. Okay, I thought he made this nice little blanket statement and then ends it with, oh, the police did good, or I don't know, something like that. And I just thought that was begging the problem.
By the way, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, the people on the screen will be able to correct me. I don't believe that either Senator Markey or Senator Warren
Right, we didn't hear
have
a
come
word.
out and condemned
Right.
brazen attack
Mhm.
on religious worship.
Right.
So there is just something about Muslim versus Jew, Black versus Jew,
Yeah.
that somehow supersedes perpetrator killing innocents, or perpetrator terrifying innocents, or perpetrator pulling a gun on innocents. And once you put white Jew and person of color in the story, it does. This is Dara Horn's point in chapter 12. And it does seem to have an effect on how it is covered. It's kind of surprising that neither of our senators has seen fit to condemn this. And I am wondering whether it's this whole, white privilege, person of color thing that gets grafted however messily upon people trying to pray, and then an attacker of color coming and throwing a gun at them, wielding a gun at them. That's her point in chapter 12. And I guess that's Barry Weiss's point. Judy Zathramary.
When we came back from Shul on Shabbos, my son and daughter-in-law were in from DC, and of course they immediately checked on all the news, and all of a sudden my daughter-in-law got really, really scared and nervous. Come to find out, she knew Rabbi Charlie. They were classmates from kindergarten through high school and from University of Michigan, and they were in the same youth groups together, and she was his prom date. So it was a terrible afternoon here because they kept trying to find, they were with his mother online because his mother was alone. And so she had people that came in and sat with her. And we sat in front of whatever news we could get. I felt that, and Alan says, well, they couldn't tell us what was going on, but we felt so isolated and alone and not knowing what was happening and knowing what was going through. And first thought was, Rabbi, have you been, I just found out, you weren't trained to throw a chair. As school teachers, we used to go through all of these programs with frightening how you would try to save the kids and what you could do with the kids. And as you said, a whole congregation. So we had a tough afternoon, and thank God it turned out the way it did. It was definitely anti-Semitism. The whole thing was so scary. And when the rabbi said he turned his back to do the Amida and he heard the gun click, we just lost it.
So I will say, let me just kind of pivot from here now to our original scheduled broadcast, because I think it connects. I do think one thing that is worth noting, and this is a point that our colleague David Koppelman has said many times in this class in different contexts, which is that David is always fond of pointing out, and properly so, that American government officials are with the side of the attack and with the side of the Jews and with the side of the innocent worshipers and whatever faith tradition that are being attacked by hate, and that law enforcement is against hate, and that the mayor and the governor are against hate, and the FBI and the SWAT teams are against hate. So it is worth pointing out that in Europe, the government was trying to kill Jews, and in Texas, the government was trying to save Jews. And there were, the special negotiators, the hostage negotiators that kept this guy in dialogue, et cetera. So, but all in all, it's I guess it is a good segue for this material that I want to talk to you about. So this is actually a complicated lesson because it's at multiple points. Let me back up for a second. I want to start with the word that we don't use very often, but most of us know what it means, and the word is Jeremiad. And a Jeremiad is, I'll just read you the dictionary definition: a long, mournful complaint or lamentation, a list of woes. And in the example, the Jeremiads of Puritan preachers, warning of moral decay. Here's another definition. A Jeremiad is a long literary work, usually in prose, in which the author bitterly laments the state of society and its morals in a serious tone of sustained invective, and always contains a prophecy of society's imminent downfall. Now, here's a question: is a Jeremiad very Jewish? How do Jewish sources think about that genre of Jeremiad? And of course, Jeremiad comes from Jeremiah. So it's actually as Jewish as it gets. And there is a whole book of the Bible, namely the prophets, Nevi'im, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Hosea, all those prophets, their basic message is to decry and lament the woes of a society. And we saw in previous weeks, you might remember the text that in early Exodus, that the crying and groaning of the Israelites makes God remember his covenant. And the Haggadah from the New American Haggadah of Jonathan Safran Foer, we looked at this text, which comments on that line that the people moaned and groaned and God remembered. And Safran Foer says it was the moaning and groaning that made God remember, and that complaining is a Jewish virtue, and that being dissatisfied is a Jewish virtue, and that protest, social protest, is a Jewish virtue. Suffering and silence is not a Jewish virtue, okay? And then just to bring this part to a close, that it is fully appropriate, Jewish, anchored in the sources, to decry, lament the sorry state of our society in the hopes that somehow we can make it better. And of course, yesterday was Martin Luther King Day. And what did Martin Luther King Jr. do, if not decry and lament the state of American society? And of course, in his climactic speech in Washington, he quotes the Hebrew Bible about justice and rolling like a mighty stream. So it seems very Jewish. That's on the one hand. And I want to show you, and I want to show you a modern Jeremiah, which is entitled suitably, and this is the first 2 pages of our handout, America is Falling Apart at the Seams. And that was David Brooks's column from Friday. America is falling apart at the seams is not a very cheery topic. It seems like a Jeremiah. It's very deeply anchored in that prophetic account. And I want to read that and ask you, first of all, if you agree with it. And then I want to ask you to think about how talking about it in those terms makes you feel, and does it make you feel inspired and energized? Does it make you feel deflated and crestfallen? How does it make you feel? But then the creative tension in this class is that a Jeremiah is not the only authentic Jewish voice. And I want to put that in creative tension with the voice of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, which I included the chapter from Joseph Telushin's book, Rebbe. And so first of all, you know this already, but it bears repeating. By far and away, the most successful denomination in Judaism in modern times is Chabad. Chabad steals the lunch of every other denomination. You put conservative, Reconstructionist, liberal, reform, modern Orthodox together, and Chabad wins in terms of greater impact. There's just no question. I was asking kids today, by the way, last week I was asking them about college and what I was trying to teach them about Hillel versus Shammai. And I was trying to get them to say Hillel. And I was asking our 13-year-olds, when you go to college in 5 years and you want to get together for Shabbos dinner, what's the name of the place that you go for Shabbos dinner when you're in college? And this girl raises her hand and says, Chabad. They didn't even know Hillel House. So, and Chabad, and I bring that up because Rabbi, the Rebbe was allergic to Jeremiahs. And the Rebbe felt it made a very intentional tzimmus to only use positive language. And the Rebbe's equation was negative language makes you feel negative. And when you feel negative, you act negative. and you have a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the Rebbe's simple equation is positive language makes you feel positive, and making you feel positive creates positive conduct. And therefore, for example, and the Rebbe didn't have it easy. He did his main work right after the Shoah. And Chabad, as Telushin points out, is alone among modern Judaism in not talking about the Shoah. And the Rebbe did not want to talk about the Shoah, didn't want to talk about anti-Semitism, didn't want to talk about negative energy, positive energy. So what I want to ask you to think about is, in general, in America today, and in the Jewish world post-Texas, we can now add Texas to the dubious list of Pittsburgh, San Diego, tri-state area, now Texas. Is the Jeremiah voice, is the Lubavitcher Rebbe voice, are they both helpful? How do you think about how to talk about our world? And how do you think about being intentional about our language? And should we perhaps try to pull a Lubavitcher Rebbe? Or are we more comfortable speaking truth as it is, which is kind of America is falling apart at the seams? That's our class. So I wanted to ask my colleague Samantha to screen share page 1 and 2. I'm just going to read a few of these paragraphs. I'm going to start with the 4th paragraph. He's got some statistics about there's less driving and more accidents. And he says, well, gloomy numbers like these were rattling around in my brain. A Substack article from Matthew Iglesias hit my inbox this week. It was titled, "All Kinds of Bad Behavior is on the Rise." Not only is reckless driving on the rise, but the number of altercations on airplanes has exploded. The murder rate is surging in cities. Drug overdoses are increasing. Americans are drinking more. Nurses say patients are getting more abusive, and so on and so on. And then significantly, I mean, you've read the article, but if you can go, Samantha, to page 2 for a moment, please. I'm going to read from the middle. Something darker and deeper seems to be happening as well, a long-term loss of solidarity, a long-term rise in estrangement and hostility. This is what it feels like to live in a society that is dissolving from the bottom up as much as from the top down. What the hell is going on? The short answer, I don't know. I also don't know what's causing the high rates of depression, suicide, and loneliness that dogged Americans even before the pandemic and are the sad flip side of all the hostility and recklessness I've just described. And then he goes on, the last 2 paragraphs, there must also be some spiritual or moral problem at the core of this. Over the past several years and over a wide range of different behaviors, Americans have been acting in fewer pro-social and relational ways and in more antisocial and self-destructive ways. But why? As a columnist, I'm supposed to have some answers, but I just don't right now. I just know the situation is dire. And the last word in this Jeremiah ad is dire. Samantha, you can please come back to full screen. So America is falling apart at the seams. It's dire. All the bad stuff is up. And he doesn't explain why, can't explain why, and doesn't know what to do about it. Now, first question I have, so I have a bunch of questions about that, and I'd love your voices. Do you agree? That's the first question. What do you think about his basic point? Do you agree or disagree with Brooks's central contentions in this hard column? Any voices here? I'd love to hear some voices about that. Anyone, please, Linda Leffert, do you agree or disagree with what Brooks is saying?
I agree.
You agree? Okay.
I mean, I noticed, but the interesting thing I also noticed, I was driving to the Berkshire, I have a place in the Berkshires, and on the Mass Turnpike, 80 is now the new 70.
Yeah.
People used to go like 5 miles above. I didn't see, on the several trips that I took, which amazed me, I didn't see a single state trooper. And I thought this would be like shooting ducks in a barrel if they want to give people speeding tickets. I mean, it was very difficult not to drive 80 miles an hour. And that was another question. One person I asked said that in general, unless you're weaving in and out and looks like you may cause an accident, they tend not to stop you. But I think what I had read, and it makes just common sense, the reason there were more deaths, although there were fewer drivers, was the speed.
Right.
You know, if you get into an accident at 65 or 70 miles an hour, it's not going to be as likely to be life-threatening as if you're 10 or 15 miles an hour later. So that, I think, but that's just one thing. There are a lot of, it doesn't say why patients are hostile in hospitals or on airlines, you know. But as far as the driving, I think it's a way of letting off steam. I think people are annoyed and oppressed, and you have to wear a mask, and I have to do this, and it's tempting if there weren't a lot of cars on the road, at least, you know, when I was going. So that's one way to kind of let off steam. But for the rest of it, I don't know.
Thank you, Linda. So it sounds like there's some broad agreement with his basic contention that there is an increase in antisocial type behavior, or an increase in selfish behavior, or an increase in behavior where you're not really regarding or seeing the consequences for other people. It feels like I don't see any hands disagreeing, which I'll come to in a minute, but Hannah, your hand was up. Hannah Meyer. If you can unmute, please, Hannah.
I found his op-ed, I usually like him, but I found it very unhelpful. And I think he is depressed, and he is bringing that forward and bringing forward all the bad things. And I don't think that's helpful to anybody's life. I think we all can see what's happening, and people are frustrated, and it's been a very hard couple of years for many people, and a lot of worry. And, you know, this is the result of it. But there's also so many good things that happen in terms of people caring for each other, and reaching out and helping with food and giving money, and, you know, like we're resettling the Afghan families, and there was no balance in his article. It was just total despair. So it was really nice to read Rabbi Talushkin's article afterwards, to see the other side.
Right. So just to be fair, Hannah, I just want to disentangle what you're saying. You say it's unhelpful. The overall presentation of it's unhelpful. That, you know, he must evidently be sharing his own personal depression with the public, and that it doesn't have balance. It doesn't tell the story of people coming together in helpful ways. But do you disagree with the central claims that it makes about antisocial and selfish behavior? I mean, when he talks about number of altercations and is exploding, and murder rate is surging, and drug overdoses are increasing, and Americans are drinking more. Do you disagree with that, or do you just feel that it's only part of the story and he's not telling the whole story?
No, I don't disagree with it. I agree that exists in greater degree than before, but, you know, some of it is explainable. And, you know, when we talk about socializing children, he talked about the schools and how behavior in schools has deteriorated. And, you know, all the norms have kind of been lost. It's a constant struggle to be our best socialized selves, and we've lost those opportunities to be there, and you know, gone into our own individual you know, heads as to how we feel, and not thinking about, you know, how others are affected. So I think it's true. But I don't think that it's helpful to be in the place where he is.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Let me get Bruce, and then I think Esther, and then Susan, and then we'll pivot to the Rebbe. Bruce.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think David Brooks is great. I think Hannah may be right where he's concerned, but I think this has a lot to do what you talked about on Shabbat, enabling. We have enablers who are enabling behavior like this. And what we need is leadership. And I think some of the things that the rabbi in Texas said was very important. And I bet you there are a lot of people who disagree with his outreach to Muslim communities, to Protestant communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that can be all lost in a horrific situation like this. That's leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, Bruce, I mean, as you know, as we all know, the Jewish community is diverse and has many opinions. If there's 64 people on this call, there are 65 opinions. But the rabbi let this guy in the shul to give him a warm space. And some would applaud that as, menschlichkeit and welcome. And others, probably it's too soon now because it's so close to the event. But some would say, what the hell were you doing? What the hell were you doing? And why isn't there a security guard? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting, like figuring out what proper leadership looks like. And was that menschlichkeit and warmth and welcome and Judaism on our best day? Or was that incredible naivete and incredible recklessness? And where were the security guards? And where was the metal detector? And what WTF? How do you let somebody with a gun into a synagogue? And where is the responsibility for assuring basic safety? Right? You could hear the voices of a broad and diverse Jewish community. What proper leadership looks like in this scary new world is going to be an interesting conversation. Let me ask Esther and then Susan, and then we're going to pivot to the Rebbe. Esther Fox?
Yeah, I have quite a bit, to be honest with you, because I think you heard me say a lot of times. If we don't learn from history, we are going to fail. And it seems to me if we are going to shut up people that screaming, there are bad things happening in this country, we are doomed. And I read a lot of stuff coming from Israel. They are also really appalled that there is no Jewish, except the ADL, that are talking about what's happening. We should get organized and try to figure out how to resolve that problem, because otherwise it will be another Germany.
Esther, first of all, can I see you? Because it's very hard to have a conversation with a blank screen.
Okay, I will let you see me.
Yes.
Sorry,
And,
I'm angry.
and Esther, just so that we take you seriously, what is the thing that Jewish establishment is not doing that you think it should be doing?
We should be more organized. We should not see only the neighbor. There are a lot of stuff that's going in the Jewish society, a lot of elderly, young children that are in need of help. We don't see that. We don't hear that.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to tell you, Ms. Meyer,
Okay.
you are helping other people. You are not helping the Jews. I'm sorry. It bothers me because it's the same thing happened to the Germans, the German Jews.
Right. So Esther, thank you. I mean, and I definitely want to acknowledge and recognize and honor the emotion of your voice. It's very important. I also want to say that there's a whole school of thought that the way you knit a society together is by recognize that hatred is hatred. And ism and all the isms have to be linked together. Racism and anti-Semitism and nativism, all of those are the enemies of peace, and all of those are the enemies of the Jews. So I think that's a big conversation to have, Esther. I hear what you're saying. It's in a way, it's the Hillel point about if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? So if Jews are only about anti-Semitism, what am I? But if Jews are not about anti-Semitism, who will be? And I think one of the things that many are trying to grapple with and move towards is how can we be against anti-Semitism and against racism and against nativism and against hatred in all of its forms and create a society where everybody's dignity is respected. That's the work here. Susan, I wanted to get last comment from you, and then we're going to pivot to the Rebbe. Susan, you're on mute. Yeah.
I had a horrible experience at Costco yesterday. I went to speak about not renewing my membership, and I was treated absolutely shabbily. And something said, that old saying, I thought, you don't know who I am. Maybe I have tender feelings. And then I thought, this poor schmuck probably has a bad life as well. Be kind, just be kind. And I resolved, to remember everyone is going through hell right now. And the being kind makes a very big difference. One more thing, my son Josh listened to Michelle's show on Sunday, and I was so moved by his reaction. He's 40, he has something on the spectrum, and he said, I had no idea other people were depressed and anxious. I thought it was only me. And there's some kind of lesson to be learned from these two stories. Something
About kindness.
And you don't know what other people are going through.
Mm.
And just be kind. It's easier
Okay.
than being a son of a,
Okay.
And
Thank you.
that goes right into David Brooks's article.
Yeah.
You
Thank you.
can take action. You can be a super nice person, even though you think you're being a jerk.
Okay. So thank you, Susan. I think that also I'm going to pivot that to the Rebbe. I know Phyllis Wilker has her hand up and Annette Miller, and I will call on both of you, but I wanted to bring the Rebbe's voice into this conversation. So Samantha, if you could please screen share page 7 of that handout. Page 7 of the handout, okay? And I want to read, I'm going to read just a few paragraphs here. For the Rebbe, the desire to choose positive words was so deeply ingrained that he hesitated to use words like evil, even when describing something that was. He did not wish to have negative words or words that had negative associations cross his lips. Instead, to refer to something bad, he would use an expression such as hefech hatov, the opposite of good. To refer to something foolish, he would say hefech hasechel, the opposite of intelligent. To refer to death, he would say hefech hachayim, the opposite of life. To refer to something unholy, he would say hefech hakadusha, the opposite of holiness. In a usage that sounds almost humorous, he would often speak of a bad person, a rasha, as one who is not a tzaddik. And the Rebbe's search for non-negative language went well beyond anything the traditional Jewish text might have intended. He apparently believed that words with bad connotations could trigger harmful associations, even the most innocent of contexts. He avoided the word undertake, lest it trigger an association with the word undertaker. And not surprisingly, no matter how great the pressure to finish a project, he never referred to the due date as a deadline. Once the word deadline is removed from one's vocabulary, one possible alternative is due date, the forbidden expression connoting death, and due date connoting birth. And then I just wanted to, Sam, if you could please go to page 8, the bottom of page 8, and then we'll unpack this. The Rebbe's avoidance of unhappy terms did not only apply to words, but also to events. To this day, Chabad remains the one large Jewish group in which little emphasis is placed on the Holocaust, both in terms of erecting memorials and sponsoring events about it. The Rebbe opposed such a focus from early on. In 1952, when his cousin Yitzchak Schneerson wrote of his involvement in Paris in the creation of the tomb of the unknown Jewish martyr to memorialize victims of the Holocaust, the Rebbe expressed a polite but forceful demurral. Forgive me if my view is not in accordance with yours. He then explained, now at a time when there are hundreds of thousands of living martyrs not unknown by any stretch, who live in abject need for physical bread and many more in need of spiritual sustenance, The main impediment to meeting their needs is simply lack of funds. Therefore, whenever funds can be procured, this immediately creates a dilemma. Should monies be used to erect a stone, a memorial, and a large square in Paris to remind passersby of the millions of Jews who died sanctifying God's name, or should these monies sustain the living, etc.? Last thing, and then I'll just, this is just so striking, is, Sam, if you can go to the last page. We've all heard, the previous generations bemoan, lament that the rising generation doesn't feel Jewish, and the Telushkin ends this with the classic Schwer sein ein Yid. It's hard to be a Jew. And the Rebbe, this is the end. At this point, when the father would say it's hard to be a Jew, the Rebbe asked the man if he often expressed himself in this way, hard to be a Jew. And the man acknowledged that in stressful times, of which there are many, he did often cite this Yiddish saying. The Rebbe responded, then that's the message your children hear. And that's the impression of Judaism they have. The Rebbe then continued, there's another Yiddish expression, it's good to be a Jew. Switch your refrain and you will notice a difference in your children's appreciation for their heritage. Samantha, if you can come back. Full screen. So, I think this is worth really dwelling on, because the Rebbe lived immediately, through the Shoah and an immediate aftermath of the Shoah. And he's preaching that it's good to be a Jew. And he's preaching, let's take positive action. And he won't even use the word deadline because of deadline. He'll use the word due date, birth, whatever his word is, due date, connoting birth. And he doesn't use the word undertake because it connotes death. And he won't say that something is evil. He'll talk about it's the opposite of good. And he talks even after the Holocaust, immediately after, that it's good to be a Jew. So what do you think about this notion of language creating its own reality? Positive language creates a positive reality, in which case the Rebbe would not go for David Brooks's column, America's Falling Apart at the Seams. Too dark, too negative, makes people feel bad. Write a different column. Due date, not deadline. Annette Miller, your hand is up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can.
Okay, yeah. I love the Rebbe's article. It's a wonderful way to begin to start to think about turning the narrative. It's difficult, and I think, yes, I was told I love to be a Jew. I think I've told my children that. And I also was told that it's difficult to keep a lot of the rules, but that there's some greater something that will be worthwhile. But I don't know if we're really saying, if we're teaching, then if you're going to say it's good to be a Jew, then let's hear why it's so good to be a Jew, because I do feel that way. And I don't know if I've had enough of the literature that tells me that a lot of the literature is about surviving, and no matter what, we have survived. And this is what our strength is, because Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu. But I heard something last night, which really gave me pause to think, if I could just share it. There was a play done by a group called I Love Jew, which is Yiddishkeit. Avi Huffman runs it out of Miami, and Erwin Kulla was one of the panelists, and there was a play being read. It was about Honor MLK is the name of the play. And I don't want to go into what the whole play is about. It's a black woman, a white man, and their arguments, and they're also coming together and laughing, and it's a big topic. But one of the things that was naturally discussed was what happened in Texas. And Erwin Kulla pointed out something that I had not heard. And he said, yes, we know that the rabbi invited this Muslim into his synagogue and even went over to him afterwards, said, you don't have to stay if you don't want to, and invited him in. But Erwin Kuller said that there was a very strong relationship between that rabbi and the Muslim community, and that the Muslim community was outside. That we didn't see those pictures. We kept on seeing the same things, walking back and forth, the chaplain for the FBI, but that the Muslim community was very much supporting the Jewish community at that moment. And that was not publicized at all. I didn't see that at all. So that seems to me to be one way to point out, he said in Charlottesville, another thing we didn't hear, it was the Christian churches that came up the next day to rebuild the synagogue or something like that. I don't know. I don't think we've maybe heard those other stories enough, and about the relationship this rabbi had with the Muslim community and the Muslim church, and that they were there to support him. So maybe along with that horror, and I love reading with Cohen said that we were not freed, we escaped. And
Right.
that is true. They escaped through their knowledge of how to get out, slowly being near the door, understanding what was going on. I mean, and that was not publicized a lot either, but they did escape and were not
Right.
freed. They were
Right.
helped. So anyway, I was just bringing out this other point that maybe we haven't heard enough. Maybe one of the ways to
Right.
tell all the isms is that.
So I think, thank you, Annette. So here's the challenge, and this is a creative tension, which I will leave you with. On the one hand, we want to live in the real world and acknowledge brutal realities that we face, which include Pittsburgh, includes San Diego, includes the tri-state, and now includes Texas. And we don't want to not share that reality and not teach that reality to our children and to ourselves, right? And that's the world in which we live. On the other hand, how do you do that honestly and then also feel that it's good to be a Jew? How do you do that honestly and also feel the joy? Simcha Shem, if you read the whole article that Talushkin did about the Rebbe, one of the Rebbe's biggest categories was Simcha Shem Mitzvah, the joy of being a Jew. And if you've read articles or listened to podcasts about Chabad, you're 19 years old, you're on a college campus, you go to Chabad, there's a home and hearth, and you smell the cholent, and they take out the wine, and there's the happy Rebbe and the happy Rebbitzin, and there's 7 kids, and it's home and hearth and warmth and cholent and wine and Shabbos and Simcha Shem Mitzvah. And that's very compelling. How do you square that circle? How do you talk about Texas and talk about it's good to be a Jew? How do you talk about Pittsburgh and talk about joy of mitzvah? And by the way, that's not even dealing with how Israel is such a lightning rod issue, such a flashpoint on college campuses because of the issue of whites and people of color, et cetera, and how confusing that is for our 19-year-olds, especially if they have not been equipped with the vocabulary of nuance and complexity, and they got a Disney World Israel education with hunky soldiers up Masada, and then they go to Oberlin. Oh my God, they are ill prepared for what they're going to find. So here's your homework. How do you hold the reality that Brooks describes? And I get Hannah's point that he doesn't talk about the upside, but no one has said that what he says is wrong. The only attack is what he says is incomplete. The only attack is his tone is too depressing. The only attack is what about the good stuff? But no one says the bad stuff isn't true. How do you own that? Plus, for no extra charge, I'll throw in anti-Semitism and Texas. How do we hold that and also do the Rebbe? And also use vocabulary that creates positive energy. Now, I thought, Annette, your comments that you quoted from Erwin Kula, that there was a Muslim community that was out there cheering, and there is good, and that these Jews had received training so they could be agents of their own redemption, and they had done bridge building, so there were other communities. So there are positive news stories. We just have to be intentional about telling them. The David Brooks posture is the default position. If you wake up in the morning, that's the world that you inherit. You inherit David Brooks, which is a world with that kind of energy. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's energy, the positive energy, is not default. That only happens if we make it happen. Next Tuesday, we're back on for 9:30. My wonderful colleague Eliza will be your teacher. I'm going to be in Israel, and I will see you again 2 weeks from today at 9:30 again. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful week. Bye.